Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. We're gonna, the Spanish Pavilion is hosting this conversation about accelerating the green industry agenda, Spain, Latin America, and the path to NDC implementation. The focus of this event is to address the green industry challenges in the Latin American and Caribbean region and the European Union experiences on that. In particular, to analyze current barriers that hinder the transition to more clean and more sustainable industrial framing, industrial networks, and industrial infrastructures. And we have for that a very amazing panel. We have Lara Lazarov, Senior Research Fellow from the Royal Institute of Elcano. We also have Blanca Patiño, Green Jobs and Just Transition Specialist for ILO, International Labor Organization in Latin America and the Caribbean. And also we have Jorge Barrick, Regional Director of Impact Capital Americas from the Hyper Impact Capital. So we're gonna address a very difficult transition that is happening now because the context in Latin America is not easy. One thing that now that we are in COP30, 10 years after the Paris Agreement was agreed, what we need to recognize is that we have failed. We have failed. The transitions are very delayed. We see that many willing to change found barriers ahead. We know also that there are really strong vested interests that jeopardize this transition. So in that regard, we need to understand more granularly where are the challenges and the opportunities. The climate change is the horizon for businesses. That's a reality. So avoiding to face climate change is a very mistaken business strategy. So in that regard, we need to be aware that, for instance, Latin America and the Caribbean particularly is very vulnerable to climate change. It's a region with a lot of vulnerabilities and with floods, tropical storms, droughts, all of those great chronic and acute events disrupt value chains, and the businesses need to address that topic. Also, understanding that the region claims that mitigation should take a pace according to common but differentiation responsibilities. The truth is that mitigation in Latin America and the Caribbean is also important for productivity, competitiveness in the global markets, and also for air quality in a very urbanized region. 80% of the population of Latin America and the Caribbean lives in urban areas, and mitigation is about health, about productivity. So we need to act both in mitigation and adaptation. The requirements of decarbonization right now demand that all the emissions should be cut 4 times in the region, at least 4 times the pace we are doing now. So there's a lot of work to do on mitigation aspects, and that is modernization of the industry. We also need to understand that the region is very dependent on commodities, and commodities are very exposed to climate physical disruptions, so adaptation also in all value chains are critical as well. But also the inequality in the region is a topic that from ECLAC we have studied for more than 66 years. We have not addressed that challenge of including all the people. So this transition, this industrial transition, needs to be framed also in a just transition. So there are risks on the transition, but there are also opportunities. And geopolitically, also there is a moment where Latin America and the Caribbean, with the European Union that has been a good partner for many, many years, can seize these opportunities in a world that has come from we're living a very weird moment, in a sense that the whole balance of power is being changed, and now there is a new disrupted but not clear where we're going. So the integration of the economy of Latin America, a long-inspired ambition of the region, now could be done with good partners, and the European Union can be a critical partner to go together because we have complementary characteristics. But coming back just to Latin America and the Caribbean, the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean really put ahead a proposal that is the big push for sustainability that will address the external restriction that we have, is linked with the technological dependency, but also the social inclusion and the decoupling of economic growth with environmental degradation. We have identified all the main sectors of the ecological transformations help to incorporate that potential. So if you put renewable energy, if you put bioeconomy, if you put energy efficiency, if you put the different pieces of the big push for sustainability, you're talking about a productive agenda that can be the way out for a very long dependency that the region has had. So that is the context. There are opportunities and challenges in any what we face in any pathway that we will walk. But for that, I am pleased to give the floor. We will start to address what are the specific challenges and potential solutions that we see for this transition to be better framed, to be what kind of policies will produce better outcomes, what are the potential ideas that will help to shape how policymakers, how the industry, and how other stakeholders can come together and push for this agenda. This is a very challenging but also very attractive agenda. We start with you, Blanca. Please, thank you and welcome.
Thank you very much for this invitation. For me, it's a pleasure to be here to collaborate in this view on how to integrate the social aspect of the development of the industry, the green industry, in our region, how we can learn from the experience that other regions like Europe can bring to Latin America, and what are our specific challenges for us. No? In general, for starting with the challenge that we have, I'd like to make reference to this number that the report on the status of the financial for nature, this is from UNEP, bring us. No? They say that for attending the triple planetary crisis, we will need up to $8.1 billion until 2050. No? So it's a lot of money that we require. So this means that starting from the base that is not only the participation of public but also private investment what we need, no? Specifically in our regions where there are so many fiscal constraints for Latin America and the Caribbean. We have high levels of debt that we need to attend, so this increases the challenge for us. So this is just a starting point. Then in terms of what are the specific challenges that enterprises for being greener, for having a industrialized agenda, then we need to see what are the constraints and what are the key enablers. No, in terms of the restrictions, we see that there is a differentiation between the SMEs and the large companies. No, the large companies have more opportunities for engaging with different approaches. For example, they can have enough human capital for attending or for advancing in the industrialization, and they might have more resources for trying different technologies that can advance the industrialization. But for SMEs, that is they are the creators of 90% of employment in our region. We have more challenges, starting for accessing this financial support they need for greening their activities, and also having access to this technology, and mainly having the human capital that they need for attending this new industrialization in the green economy. So starting from that, from the perspective of ILO, we see the productivity you were mentioning aligned with the purpose of having decent works, no? In terms of how we can make this green industrialization an engine for creating more jobs that are decent jobs and can be sustainable. So for this, the approach that we have is in terms of ecosystems that generate this productivity for decent jobs, no? And with this, we have an approach that covers 3 layers, no? The first one is the macro layer, which is the policy entry points we have that make possible that productivity policies, industrial policies, labor policies, and social outcomes are all together. Then we have the meso layer that is like in terms of sectorial approaches, no? We understand that the sectorial challenges are very specific, and the energy sector, the agriculture, for example, has a lot of opportunities in our region, but also many constraints. And then we have the micro level, the level of the enterprises. And then for the macro level, we would say that we will need a regulatory approach that supports these policies through to advance in the green industrialization. But we also have a lot of incoherence between policies. No, we might want more productivity, more industrialization, but not necessarily attached to social outcomes. So it's important how we can integrate all of these together. And the channel we see from ILO is just transition. No, is exactly understanding what are these challenges and how we can integrate this all in a coherent policy framework. Then we have at the sectorial level, as I was saying, important constraints for SMEs mainly, how we can provide easy opportunities for them to have access to the financial means, how they can have more technical assistance for greening their activities and processes. And then in relation to the sectorial, the enterprises, then we have also even higher challenges in terms of low rates of productivity and the formalization of these enterprises. So with all these challenges, then these coherent policies that we can create need to integrate these 3 layers together. But in terms of the opportunities are also huge. No? For example, in terms of employment creation, from IDB and ILO perspective, we have some numbers that say that we can create up to 22 million jobs until 2030 in different sectors where Latin America has more opportunities, like the agriculture, the energy renewals. No, we have so many important opportunities, but also there is a risk that we can lose up to 7.5 million jobs in sectors associated to the fossil fuels and extractive sectors. So having in mind these constraints, opportunities, and challenges for job creation, these policies that we can create for supporting the advance of the green industrialization have to come together and consider these targets at the same time, because if we see them as separate things that go alone, then it's going to be very difficult to create the necessary skills that the industry needs for advancing the agenda. Yeah, so this is all I could say in terms of the big picture of Latin America and the Caribbean.
Thank you very much, Blanca. And I think the dimension you emphasize on jobs, that this well-driven, this transition is about more decent jobs in general and more inclusive. That's I haven't listened any leader of the region not talking about the need of jobs. So it's a priority, and this is an opportunity that obviously has challenges, but looking ahead, if you deal properly with these challenges, you can manage to create more jobs and to make a wave of expansion of this activity. So thank you very much. We come back with you later. Now we're gonna ask another perspective from Jorge Barrick. As an investor, you mentioned, Blanca, about the investment needs that are already identified. We in ECLAC, in the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, 2 years ago, we made an assessment of the needs, investment needs, the financial needs for the NDCs 2.0 in the region, and it was around 3.7 to 4.9 percentage of the GDP. That sounds big, but it is not such, because many of these investments are in infrastructure like water sanitation, water sewages, or like renewable energy, transport, public transport, etc. So these are investments, are not costs. And also something to put as a reference, the region is the worst in performing as investment for GDP. Latin America and the Caribbean invest only 19% of the GDP, while the other emerging economies that are becoming much more dynamic than ours because of the investment, invest around 35%. So between all the Southeast of Asia, between 19 and 35, 5% that is required for NDCs is not so much, and it's productive. It's a productive investment. So please tell us, Jorge, why is that not happening? What are the view that you see for that to happen?
Well, thank you very much for inviting us here, being part of this group. Oh, okay. I need to be reminded. Being part of this group, I think that very much appreciated Blanca's comments, because it highlights what the region already has. The region has a lot of potential, and the region has a lot of potential already. And so it's important, I think, to issue a challenge here, because it's a competitiveness challenge that we have to issue. We are strengthening our human capital. Our human capital transitions well. It has in the past. We don't have a technology problem. We don't have a resources problem, from the perspective that there's never been more resources, more financial resources available looking for projects in the transition. Never has there been so many resources. Why are they not coming here? That's the question. Well, and that's something that I believe can be resolved, well, in several ways. One is, I think there needs to be political commitment. Countries that have become very successful at attracting investment, there is a model already underway. There are some countries that have been quite successful at attracting investment in the Americas. We need to see what it is that they've been doing to attract those investments, make them attractive. I think that that's already something that we can do, follow those. The next thing we can do is we need to strengthen our human capital. And some countries have taken steps already, significant steps towards that. Because at the end, it's been 10 years since the Paris agreements. I think we're at our third iteration of NDCs. A government can make a crystal clear, can send a crystal clear signal that it wants to become a green investment hub for in the world. And to do that, it needs to lead by example. How does it do that? It takes its last NDC and it collates it, it coordinates it with its planning budget. And the investments on resilient infrastructure, for example, are more than 5%. We're going to make those investments anyway. They are needed. And if they take that lead, that is one of the strongest signals you can send to private sector investors. Once you send that, you're working on human capital, and you ensure that your country is open for investment, so to speak. That's one piece of it, the leading by example. The other piece is, how do you unlock local, domestic investment? And that in Latin America has been very difficult to do. How do you unlock the pension funds? How do you unlock the different bourses in the different countries so that people begin to focus their investments in those areas? That is going to strengthen the investment base in the region, and it's going to further attract other investors. But if we aren't doing it ourselves, and we're just depending on the IDB or the World Bank to take the lead, we're going to wait another 10 years, and then another 10 years, and then, well, I'll stop there speculating on what can happen. But sorry, that's how I see it, and I think we should issue a challenge. There are things we can do. There are proposals we can recommend, because there's a lot of work already done on human capital. We have a population that is still young and interested in that very tech savvy. We have a very tech savvy youth, and I think that we can benefit from quite a few advantages beyond commodities, which is what we have always counted on, and we need to take that lead. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Jorge. Yes, commodities has been the course of commodities somehow. No, yeah, it's well taken point, and yes, mobilizing local capital has been a challenge in the region. Part of the reasons why we are only 19% of investments is because savings in the region is because many reasons behind historical reasons is not something that our population does, and so people investing in our own countries is not people prefers to spend than invest. So we need to change culturally something to, and that means give clarity on the future. That is sustainability. So that's very linked. So now, taking advantage that Lara is here, and you're from the Elcano Institute, Royal Institute, you have been supporting the experience of just transition in Spain, and you have seen how the green investments and the transformation of different industries in Spain and the European Union, where the green economy was a very strong initiative that unfortunately now is weakened a little bit. But you have experience that really can show us some hints of where we can strengthen the greening of this transition. So please share with us part of this.
Thank you. So, can you hear me? Yes, great. So in terms of Spain's experience in just transition, we have quite a well-developed governance framework. We have an Just Transition Institute. We also have a Just Transition strategy. This strategy runs from 2019 to 2024. So this year, next year, we're having the update. We're the only member state of the European Union that has allocated 300 million to just transition out of the recovery and resilience funds after the COVID. Something that we focused on in the first instance is how to phase coal out. And in order to do that, there was an urgent plan to phase it out. There were also tripartite agreements that were paramount in order to understand what stakeholders wanted. And there's also an instrument called the Just Transition Agreement that was modeled on the French case, on the French ecological transition contracts, by which there was coordination between, because you both mentioned how coordination is very important and how coherent policies drive investment. So this vertical coordination across administrations within the Just Transition agreements are also key. And this has delivered in Just Transition areas different projects with the goal of balancing out the jobs that are lost because we're phasing out coals and coal power plants with the jobs that are created. Because one thing that the Spanish administration has done is to, in public tenders, they have awarded certain points, and when there are very competitive tenders, every point counts. So they have awarded certain points in public tenders to projects that have a just transition component. So you have that incentive in order for projects that are going to be developed in those regions that are stand to lose because of their transition. So that's one of the things that Spain is doing. It's currently in the process of updating its just transition strategy, and this is going to cover other areas, other sectors. One thing that we do see in Spain is that people are sort of halfway regarding whether the transition is going to be good or bad for the economy. So, a little bit less than half of the people that we interviewed say that this transition is going to be bad for the economy. And a quarter of our interviews say that climate policies reduce their freedom. So we have a problem there. But on the other side, on the more positive side, 70% of our respondents say that they would support allocating part of the national state budget to either companies or that are affected by climate change, so just adaptation funding, if we want to expand the concept of just transition, or companies that stand to lose because of the policies undertaken or implemented to address decarbonisation. So that's a good sign. And now comes the second part. Now, Spain has a goal of deploying 160 gigawatts of renewables by 2030. And we see pockets of resistance. So we don't want big projects, we don't want big solar panels and solar power plants near our homes. So we have a very well-developed governance mechanism for the phase-out. And we have initiatives by private companies and by civil society organizations to see how this transition for the phase-in of renewables can happen. But we don't have a governance framework. And on Alcana, what we're proposing is that we can build on, and not replicate, but build on what we know about this governance framework for the phase-out of fossil fuels, so that we can have something similar adapted for the phase-in of renewables, so that localities where these big projects are going to be located are on board and stand to benefit from the just transition as well.
Thank you very much, Lara. I think you bring to the table something that is really challenging. So when I started this panel, I said we have failed. No, in 10 years we are really going behind of what should be.
Santiago, can we disagree with you on the failure?
On the?
On the failure.
Yeah?
Yeah, okay. I mean, we haven't come all the way, but I think it's fair to recognize that the Paris Agreement has, so the Paris Agreement has delivered some greenhouse gas emission reductions. We're not at 4 degrees now, we are, a bit less way far off what we need to be. But
Yeah.
you know.
Obviously, there is progress, but the 1.5 is really away now. So, and for the region, the 1.5 is critical issue because we are really, really very vulnerable, and many tipping points that are global challenge are. But yes, there have been progress. Of course, there have been progress, but it's going to getting very complicated. But I wanted to highlight from your intervention this idea that climate policies are, because it's very, very politically visible, climate policies are against freedom, and investors usually want clarity, certainty, and freedom. And I think it is not against one against the other. Every single market is regulated. Even the most freer market that you can find is regulated. And what we want is climate policies that regulate some tipping points, but mainly climate policies that internalize the externalities of the economic activities. That is fair, because if not, those externalities will be paid by the society and the environment sooner or later. So it's about really putting the market well with the adequate price signals. So that's the point. So, but yes, it's true that there is a lot of conversation around that you're constraining my freedom, and that's not the case. But it's a very good point, and about the experience of the just transition in Spain, and this reluctance that some communities have to deploy renewable energy. We need to learn about that as well. I think this the public debate that happens in Spain around that is important. So I want to pass now we have still some time, and we have put here that we will give the floor to them. But if you want to send a specific message on the challenges ahead and the opportunities for accelerating the green industry agenda in Spain, Latin America, and the path to NDC implementation, what will be your thinking, Blanca?
Well, considering the perspective of this ecosystem for productivity and this work that I was mentioning previously, I have found out that there are at least 5 mechanisms that we could consider for the future. The first is how we can integrate this just transition approach to industrial and to environmental policies. This policy coherence I was making reference. Then we have how we can create the enablers for enterprises, in terms of having consideration especially for the SMEs, because they have more challenges than large companies, in terms of how to develop these regulatory approaches, but also how we can enhance them in terms of financial means, and also having more technical assistance for knowing how to do this transition. Then in terms of people, this is a people-centered agenda. So we believe that it's not only about investing in the nature, but it's investing in people. So investing in the skills as an opportunity, as you were mentioning previously, having a look at this not as a cost, but as an investment. This is what I mean. And then in terms of social dialogue, because in order to combine together all the needs of enterprises, workers, governments, we need to have a clear idea and a common agenda. And sometimes it might sound easy, but it's not, because sometimes we are going to different targets. So it's important to have these dialogues to advance together to the same purpose. And finally, I consider there are so many good experiences. For example, Spain is for us in Latin America a very important reference. In South Africa, in Indonesia, they are also advancing, for example, in the coal mining sector, and how to do the green transition. And I think it's how we can advance faster by going together. For example, ILO is working in a just transition policy gateway. This is a platform that hopes to gather together all these good experiences that we are having in terms of policies. So countries can not, do not have to, well, in Spanish we would say, invent the wheel. No? So not having a look at these experiences is going to support and make things go faster, because the urgencies of the climate agenda, the planet is asking us for more coherence, but also we need to go faster. So this is how we can achieve that.
Thank you, Blanca. Jorge, some remarks?
Yeah, I really appreciated, can you hear me? Yeah? Okay. Really appreciated Lara's comments here, because it highlights that there is no one solution. And so I can see from the perspective of Latin America how certainty is important, and one of the signals we would like to see is from our governments is precisely what the Spanish government has begun to do, and integrate and fund parts of their NDC, right? But that's not all necessarily, and there's going to be some trade-offs, which is part of what you were saying, in terms of businesses don't like regulation so much, but we do need some regulation. So in terms of, so there's no one solution necessarily, and every country has its particular dynamics, and the trade-off is going to be a little bit different, because there's really no solutions here, there's just trade-offs. And what makes this uniquely difficult is that while I still consider that the government sending a strong signal by not just saying it's going to do something, but actually funding it, especially resilient infrastructure, which is absolutely necessary as we face all these vulnerabilities. I think that there's needs to be a recognition, and this goes back to my first comment that it's been 10 years, right? That's unfair, in the sense that it's systemic change. Systemic change takes a long time, and not just that, but there's a lot of vested interests that need to be addressed, at least perceived to be addressed equally in terms of policy. To reduce asymmetries and to reduce resistance. I still believe, and this is uncharacteristic of me, I still believe government has to take the lead in something as big as this. And so I believe that these signals have to be beyond signals, and it has to be consistent and coherent. One final thing I'll say is that private sector is moving, and private investment is moving fast in this direction with just enough clarity and certainty. Just yesterday I was at this event where I was one of the judges that was looking at five significant pitches from Brazil of new businesses that were looking for investment. The size of them, the scale of them, the enthusiasm, their application of technology. They were saying Brazil has given us just enough that we feel we can go into the market and we can raise money. And so it's a mixed story. It's not just a one-sided story, but I still believe it's a very positive story. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Jorge. Lara, some remark?
Sorry. You've talked about how, in a very uncharacteristic manner for you, you're looking at regulation, and what we see is that framework climate laws, according to Eskander and Fankhauser, 3 years after they've been adopted, they help reduce CO2 emissions per unit of GDP by 0.78%. In the 3 years after, so medium to longer term, this greenhouse gas emission reduction is even greater, is 1.79% per unit of GDP. So these climate laws drive greenhouse gas emission reductions, and not only that, but they also help give that sense of direction that you were talking about. You need coherent policies, you need continuous policies as well. And if you have a framework climate law, it's much more difficult to backslide. It's not impossible, but it has to go through all of the, parliamentary processes to undo that. So that's one of the things that probably could help. The other element that's been identified and in the report that we jointly produced and reviewed with Alinea was that the NDCs are aspirational and that these should really become an investment roadmap. So really we should be pushing perhaps for, after we submit those NDCs, it's probably unrealistic to believe that they by themselves are going to be an investment roadmap, but maybe, something after could be that investment roadmap. Obviously, countries would have to be supported in order to be able to do that, but probably that would be one way forward in terms of driving that investment. And you've also talked about, and we talked about it in the report, that we should have finance ministries sitting with environment ministries in order to produce our regulations and our commitments. And this speaks to another governance function, which is the sectoral integration. I don't think that necessarily you only need finance and environment ministries sitting together. I think it's a whole of the government approach. I think that strategy and that narrative really helps drive action forward. So if it's, if the goal is clear, if the entire government is behind it, if you have support for those who stand to lose, it's much more, all of this is much more conducive to driving investment. You've talked about fragmentation across government levels, and we've talked about knowledge and human capital. Another governance function that might be of interest here is independent advisory bodies. In the UK, for example, the Climate Change Act of 2008, after the Climate Change Act, there was a Committee on Climate Change, and this has helped elevate the narrative, the debate. It's been used across the aisle, and I think that, again, gives that sense of strategy that can drive things forward. And perhaps also stakeholder engagement, going back to your point, Blanca, that's also in the report. How do we do this, and how do we do it properly? How do we do it meaningfully? I'm sure there are many experiences perhaps in Colombia as well, because I believe that their just transition initiative is relatively robust. Please correct me if I'm wrong. With its things that go better, things that go worse. I mean, the Spanish case is also an ongoing exercise, but one thing that one could do is deploy citizens' assemblies. Again, that they try to represent the people, so that would be another issue that we could look at. I don't know whether that might answer partially.
Oh, thank you very much. I think we have, if there is any questions from the floor, yes? Two questions we have from the floor. We have a little bit of time for that. Thank you.
Hi everyone, good afternoon. My name's Guy Edwards. I'm from the University of Sussex, and I'm also part of the Climate Social Science Network. Can you hear me okay? Shall I use another microphone perhaps? Yeah? Okay. Oh, okay. Sorry, thank you. Excellent. Yeah, I had a question just to pick up on a couple of themes that you've been discussing on the backsliding, for example, and also how robust Colombia's energy transition is, to take one example. And I was curious about how you guys at the ILO, ECLAC, are looking at kind of fake news and kind of climate information integrity, because of course at CELAC you're producing wonderful reports, but how can you sell these to governments that are getting increasingly suspicious, and the private sector, other actors in Congress or the media that are pushing back? So I was curious, particularly ILO and CEPAL, how you guys are kind of looking at that. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. We have another one. Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay, thank you. Hello, my name is Carla and I'm from Guatemala. So you were talking about like internal budgets and internal investment. So I have one question, just I read it down. So given the need to strengthen country internal finance and create conditions for domestic investment, how can this be linked to the actual finance discussion? Because in finances we are looking like for like asking for more international resource. So how you can link this conversation to that discussion? Thank you.
Thanks to you. Really appreciate these two questions. Anyone wants to pop up from them? Yes, please, Blanca.
Yes, thank you. I want to answer question one because it's very close to our agenda, because I think in a world where political drivers are changing so fast, where we have left to the very left, to the right, no, it's important to have evidence-based policies. So for ILO, this is part of the ILO guidelines for a just transition towards environmental sustainability. And for that, we have advanced in a just transition assessment model. We call it like this. We have some example, even not starting in Latin America, but in Africa. And now we are doing that in Latin America. For example, 2 years ago, we had a regional event bringing this tool, and we have advanced. We have some cases in Argentina. In Colombia, we are applying that to a local, so 2 regions in the country that are in the coal mining sectors. For example, we want to also bring that to the local understanding of what are the impacts of the climate scenarios and policies to employment and to social development. So for that, we have this agenda. And for example, I would like to say, in the case of Jamaica, for example, a very small development island, we have also developed a technical working group, which is trying to support not only this evidence-based, but also this dialogue that we always talk about, no? So this was a group that was integrated by the University of West Indies, Ministry of Labor, Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Planning. As you were saying, it's important to have this coherent approach from government, and it worked quite well, and we have results that have been considered for the updating process of the NDC. So this is how we try to base policies on evidence and also dialogue.
Thank you, Blanca. And about investments, you want to address that?
Yeah. Okay. So this is an important question. Now, from an investor perspective, when we look at the opportunities in the various countries, we're looking for conditions, and Guatemala has actually been successful in being in Central America an attractor of investments. It also, and this won't be a surprise to you, it also has a lot of domestic investment. So there is a lot of investment that just originates in Guatemala, including angel investment, impact investment, and the like. Now, what I have seen with this last government in particular is that they have begun to connect some important policies in terms of adaptation and resilience to the budget. And I think that strengthens the signal that is being sent out there. Now, how do you connect that to that conversation, that discussion, to the negotiations here? I'm not as familiar with the negotiations, but what you do control is how Guatemala is preparing itself and the competitiveness that Guatemala is as an attractor for these types of investments. And resilient infrastructure, especially recently, we recently had some difficulties there, plus there was a dry season that was extended that had a significant impact on the spices industry, especially in Alta Verapaz. I know that the government is looking at investing in a different type, in 2 things. One is irrigation, different irrigation approaches, and is putting some of its own money to leverage additional investment, and it's going to be attracting funds. And the other aspect has been more drought resistant crops, right? So I see things moving in Guatemala where we are quite active. I see things moving in a really interesting direction because they're tying things up. It's not, nothing is on its own. It's on its own channel. And that's something that I think that you guys can highlight as an example of what you guys are doing and perhaps integrate that into your own discussions here.
Well, from our perspective on ECLAC, and we well, here in this COP, there is an initiative about misinformation that the presidency of COP30 from Brazil has been promoted, and there are some outcomes there. But in our side, we are the technical secretariat of the Escazú agreement about information, public participation, protection of environmental defenders, etc. That is a commitment with truth as possible. There is a lot of noise and it is going against, but it's one of the outcomes of this conversation. I think is about that. It's about there is science evidence that informs us that the cost of no action is much higher than the cost of action. Is the most vulnerable as are the most marginal people right now. The competitiveness of the region relies on the transition and policies that promote the transition. The wealth of all our population depends on that. So talking about truths will inform what has been said here, that an open discussion is required, a public forum that really informs people and all citizens and different stakeholders about that. And yes, the public interest could be damaging for some vested interests, but there are some also is just transition not only for the most marginal, but just transition for as far as possible for every single vested interest that is negatively affected by the policies. So we need to regain the conversation based on truth, and we need to push further on that. Regarding investments, to mobilize local capital markets, we are already working in your country and unfortunately in all Central America with COSEFIN, with the Ministers of Finance, and with the Monetary Council of Central America, with the central bankers, precisely on looking the ways and means to start putting some regulatory framework that pushes investors to internalize environmental externalities, and also to innovative financial instruments to understand the benefits of the transition of the financial system into sustainable financial systems. And that can mobilize, because it's about risk and opportunity. Climate risks are really present in the region. Is not something that will happen, it's already happening. So having the adequate framing for investments means that you deal with those risks and you identify the opportunities, and we are working with the authorities to do that, and also some further engagement with the private sector. We also work with the taxonomies in the region. So there are many pieces being moved that we are supporting, and there are many. It's not us. It's many institutions. So I think the pieces are there. We are not failing, but going very late. But there is progress in the region. So probably there will be this appetite for investments that Jorge has mentioned. Is being framed slowly, but by the regulation. So I don't want to make a conclusion, because this is not a conversation that we conclude, but I want to highlight that the question about accelerating the green industry agenda is not because it's something of a fashion. No, it's necessary We were talking about NDCs and how this should be translated into an investment portfolio. The country platforms and the financial corridors that some other countries mentioned is more or less the same idea. Is precisely that the NDCs of the region will become a portfolio for investments as far as possible, with matchmaking mechanisms, with bringing different actors of the financial ecosystem into implementing NDCs, and this is an opportunity. And the clarity that yes, the transformation is required. In economics, it's not new that these transitions happen. Schumpeter identified the destructive destructive creation as a mechanism of the economic system to regenerate it and to bring more wealth to the people. And we are in the middle, like Gramsci would say, we are where the monster has not died, but and the new sun has not rise. Paraphrasing is much beautiful what he said. But yes, we are in the middle of something that eventually will come, and we need to be optimistic in that sense. There is a lot of obstacles to face, but we are getting better. We are not there. And I want to thank Lara, Blanca, and Jorge for a really interesting and inspiring conversation. Please a round of applause to our panelists. And also want to thank to Alinea from the UE, Universidad Instituto Empresa from Spain, that they supported this, they organized and supported this event. And also obviously to the government of Spain that they host us in the pavilion. Particularly to the Fundación Biodiversidad and to the Oficina Española de Cambio Climático, del Ministerio de Transición Ecológica y Reto Demográfico. Thanks for hosting us, and yes, thanks to the people here present and to those that we hosted by streaming. Thanks and have a nice day. See you.